I had written return to sender. This person does not live here on that envelope 3 times before I ever drove to that address. The first time it showed up, I flipped it over, saw the name, saw my address, and figured the post office made a mistake. Happens. I wrote it on the back in black marker and dropped it back in the box. It came again. I wrote it again. Same marker, same box. I was not suspicious. I was not curious. I was irritated, the way you get irritated. But I am a cop, 15 years on the job. And one thing 15 years does to you is this. It makes names stick. You run enough names in enough dark parking lots at 2 in the morning, you stop being able to let them go. That name sat somewhere in the back of my head, the way names do when you cannot explain why you remembered them. Then she called, said she had to work late, said do not wait up. I do not know what made me drive there. I was not following her. I was not running a surveillance operation on my own wife. I just found myself on that street, engine running, headlights off, looking at a driveway that had nothing to do with my life. Her car was in it. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because I looked at my watch when I pulled up, and I looked at it again when I pulled away. 11 minutes to understand that everything I thought I knew about my marriage was sitting in a stranger's driveway at 9 o'clock on a night she said she had to work late. That was not even the worst part. The worst part came 3 weeks later when I started pulling the thread she thought nobody would ever find and realized she had not just been lying to me about where she was going. She had been paying for it. She was the one who brought up the vow renewal. I want to be clear about that. It was not my idea. It was not something we stumbled into together over dinner. She came to me with a plan, a venue, a date, a guest list she had already started. She said she wanted to stand in front of the people we loved and choose me again. Said 15 years meant something worth marking. Said she wanted me to hear her say it out loud one more time. I believed her, every word. That is the part I keep coming back to, not the betrayal itself, but how thoroughly I believed her. I have interviewed suspects for 15 years. I have sat across a table from people lying directly into my face and known it before they finished the sentence. Something in the delivery is always off. The eyes go somewhere the words are not. The hands do something the voice does not account for. She never did any of that. She looked at me the way she always looked at me. She planned that ceremony the way she planned everything, with the kind of attention to detail that made you feel like you were the only thing in the room worth paying attention to. She wrote her own vows, read them in front of 63 people with her voice and her eyes on mine the entire time. I counted the guests afterward, 63, because that is what I do. I notice things. I count things. I file them away without knowing why. What I did not notice was what she had filed away without me. The venue was booked for an afternoon ceremony. The flowers were her idea. White, simple, nothing excessive. She wore the same perfume she wore the night we met. Said she did it on purpose. Said some things were worth repeating. She had been repeating a lot of things I did not know about. The mail started coming about 6 weeks after the ceremony. Plain white envelopes, a name I had no reason to know. My address printed clean across the front like it belonged there. The first time, I figured it was a forwarding error, the kind of thing that fixes itself. I wrote return to sender on the back in black marker and put it in the box. It came back, not the same envelope, a new one, same name, same address, my address. I wrote it again, same words, same marker, and went inside to make coffee. 15 years of police work teaches you to log the things that do not fit, even when you do not know yet why they do not fit. That name went into the back of my head, the way names do when something about them refuses to stay quiet. I was not alarmed. I was not suspicious. I was just a cop who remembered a name he had no reason to remember. And 3 weeks later, standing in the dark on a street I had never been on, looking at my wife's car in a stranger's driveway at 9 o'clock. I understood why it would not let me go. I went back to work the next morning. I finished my shift. I came home, ate, watched television with my wife sitting 3 feet away from me on the same couch we had owned for 11 years, and I said nothing because I am a cop, and some cops do not move on what they feel. They move on what they can prove. But I was building something in my head the whole time. She was relaxed that night, no tension in her shoulders, no hesitation when she asked about my day. She made a comment about the show we were watching, laughed at something that was not that funny, refilled my glass without being asked. The performance was flawless. If I had not seen what I saw the night before, I would have seen nothing. That is what stayed with me, not the anger, not the grief, the flawlessness. Because a woman that composed under pressure had been composed under pressure for a long time. I started thinking about the timeline. 6 weeks after the vow renewal, the first envelope appeared. But ceremonies do not change behavior, they reflect it, which meant whatever was happening in that driveway was not new. It was established, comfortable, the kind of arrangement that does not get comfortable overnight. I started counting backwards the way I count everything. I thought about the overtime she had been logging at work, hours that made sense on the surface. She was diligent. Her supervisors had never questioned her. I thought about the nights she came home later than expected and explained it before I could ask, the way detail-oriented people explain things before questions form, because they have rehearsed the answer before the question exists. I made a decision. I was not going to confront her. Not yet. Confrontation is what civilians do when they are operating on emotion. I was not operating on emotion. I was operating on one confirmed visual and 15 years of knowing that the first thing you establish is surveillance, because the moment a target knows they are being watched, the evidence disappears and the story changes. She was not going to know she was being watched. 3 nights later, she called from work, said something had come up, said she would be late, said do not wait up. I told her I understood. I told her to be careful driving. I waited 45 minutes after she hung up, backed out of the driveway, and drove to that street with my headlights off 2 blocks out. Her car was in the driveway. Again. I drove past slowly, noted the unit number on the building, noted the make and model of every vehicle on the block, and drove home the long way, because now I had a pattern, and patterns are what cases are built on. The next morning, I ran the name from the envelope through every system I had access to. What came back made the vow renewal feel like a eulogy she had written for a marriage she had already decided to bury. I ran the name at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I logged into the terminal before the day shift rotation came through, when the bullpen was empty and the only sound was the coffee maker doing what it always does at that hour. I sat at a workstation that was not mine. In a corner nobody walked past before 7, and I typed a name into a system I had full legal access to as a sworn officer of this department. What I did not have was a legitimate reason to be there. I want to be clear about that. I knew it then, and I know it now. Running a name through law enforcement databases for personal use violates department policy in ways that do not bend for extenuating circumstances. There is no checkbox on the form for my wife's car was in this man's driveway. The policy exists for good reasons. I had put my input in it, in a version of it, 7 years ago. I ran the name anyway. What came back was not what I expected. No record, no priors, nothing that would have flagged him in any system under any circumstance. He was employed, tax-paying, unremarkable in every way that databases measure a person, mid-40s, worked in property management, had lived at that address for 14 months. I sat with that number. 14 months is not an accident. 14 months is not a mistake that happened once and spiraled. 14 months is a decision that gets made and then remade every single day for 14 consecutive months. The vow renewal was 11 months in. She stood in front of 63 people, read words she wrote herself, looked me in the eye without flinching. 11 months into something she had already decided was worth maintaining. I closed the terminal, stood at the window watching the parking lot fill up, and thought about what I was going to do with information I could never officially tell anyone I had. The information was real. The method was not something I could put in a report, not something I could hand to an attorney without ending my career in the same breath. I had confirmed who he was. I had confirmed how long he had been there. And I had to build something legitimate around knowledge that could never see the light of day. 15 years of police work teaches you that the truth and the provable truth are not always the same thing. I needed the provable truth. So I went back to the one thing that required no explanation: the envelopes, a name, my address, a paper trail the post office had created without anyone's permission. I remembered the name. I had the address. That afternoon, I called a private investigator I had worked alongside on a civil case 4 years earlier. Retired detective, 22 years on the job before he went private. A man who understood exactly how to build a file that would hold up in a Virginia courtroom without anyone asking how the investigation started. I told him I had a name and an address. I told him I needed documentation. I told him I needed it clean. He told me he would have something in days, and damn if he didn't, and it changed everything. He came with a folder and nothing else. Photographs inside, time-stamped, 14 of them across 6 separate visits. Her car in that driveway, her walking to that front door, him opening it, greeting her with a kiss and spanking her bottom. That last detail is the one that stayed with me. You do not open a door that fast for someone you are still pretending is casual. I took the folder. He took his fee. The arrangement was complete. That same afternoon, I walked into a family law office with 20 years of Virginia practice behind it and gave him a folder without a word. The attorney opened it, went through every photograph without looking up, closed it, and leaned back. He asked one question: how long have I sat with this? I told him about the envelopes, the name, the address, the 3 times I wrote return to sender before something made me drive to that street and sit there for 11 minutes in the dark. He picked up a legal pad and started writing before I finished the sentence. He explained Virginia law the way someone explains something they have explained 1,000 times, but still mean. If a spouse cheats and can be proven, they don't get alimony, not a consideration, not a factor to be weighed against other factors. 0. The only exception is manifest injustice, a threshold so narrow Virginia courts have applied it fewer times than he had fingers on one hand. She was not going to meet that threshold. He said discovery would do the rest, said once we filed, her financials would be subject to full subpoena, every account, every transaction, every payment she had made from anything attached to her name going back as far as the court considered relevant. I asked him what he expected to find. He said he expected to find exactly what people who maintain a second life always leave behind: a paper trail they convinced themselves was invisible because nobody they knew was looking. He filed 3 weeks later. She did not see it coming. Her attorney called mine within 48 hours, not with a denial, not with a counteroffer, but with a question neither of them could answer yet. How did he find out? Discovery answered every question she thought she had buried. Her financials came back with something her attorney could not explain away: a separate account opened 19 months before we filed. Not in her name exactly, a variation close enough to be hers and distant enough to require a second look. Small deposits, irregular intervals, just enough structure to cover a monthly obligation nobody in our life was supposed to know existed. 19 months ago, I was working doubles, and she was building infrastructure. The lease attached to that address listed her account as a contributing financial party. He worked in property management, mid-40s, the kind of employment history that looks stable on paper until a landlord pulls the full picture. His income alone did not qualify him for the unit. She co-signed, not because she was careless, but because the alternative was losing the arrangement, and she had invested too much to let it collapse over a credit check. 14 months of consistent payments, same amount, same timing, never once missed, because a woman this methodical does not miss payments on something she has decided is permanent. Her attorney came back with a settlement figure that assumed I wanted this quiet. My attorney sent back 2 lines, Virginia code regarding adultery and no alimony. Her attorney requested mediation. My attorney declined. Her attorney submitted a lower figure. My attorney sent the same 2 lines. Her attorney retained a forensic accountant to challenge the account classification. The forensic accountant found something her own attorney did not expect. The deposits funding that account traced back to her freelance consulting work, clients she had been invoicing privately for 19 months. Payments routed directly into an account buried deep enough that I would never have found it on my own. She was a marketing coordinator. Freelance income on the side was not unusual for someone in her field. It was the perfect cover for money that needed to move without questions. Under Virginia law, it did not matter how she earned it. The money was marital property, deliberately diverted from the marriage to fund an arrangement that existed outside it. That is not just adultery in a Virginia courtroom. That is marriage or marital waste or whatever you want to call it. The deliberate dissipation of marital assets, which collapsed every financial argument she had before it was made. Her second attorney called mine after the forensic accounting came back. He did not request anything. The vow renewal came up once when her first attorney submitted a character filing suggesting the strength of our marriage prior to the dissolution. My attorney submitted the investigator's photographs in response, time-stamped. 6 visits, 11 months into the arrangement she was actively maintaining. The afternoon, she stood before 63 people and read vows she wrote herself. The character filing was withdrawn the same day. There was no trial. There was no courtroom confrontation. There was just a settlement agreement that reflected what Virginia had already decided. She left with what she came in with. No support, no pension claim, no percentage of 15 years she spent 19 months quietly walking away from. She signed it on a morning I was on shift. My attorney sent 2 words, "It's done." I went back to work the morning she signed. 3rd shift, same precinct, same parking lot, same coffee from the same machine that has never once tasted like actual coffee. I sat in the cruiser for a few minutes before I went in. Same few minutes I sat on that street the first night I saw her car in that driveway. I do not know why the exact 11 minutes. It is just what it took. Here is what 15 years of this job actually teaches you. Not the procedures, not the case law, not the report writing. It teaches you that people reveal themselves, every single one of them. You cannot maintain 2 lives indefinitely without the weight of one eventually showing up somewhere it was never supposed to be. For her, it was an envelope, plain white, a name I had no reason to know, my address. 3 times I wrote return to sender without a second thought. 3 times the truth tried to find me before I was ready to find it. I think about the vow renewal more than I probably should. Not the ceremony itself, the preparation, the weeks she spent planning it, the venue, the flowers, the guest list she brought to me already half finished, the vow she wrote herself, practiced somewhere I never saw, and delivered without her voice breaking once. All of it happening 11 months into something she had already decided was not stopping. That kind of discipline is something I understand professionally. Personally, it still does not compute. She is gone now, out of the state from what I hear, which is not something I went looking for and not something I am going to pretend does not make the job easier. My pension is intact. The house is mine. Virginia made sure of that before she had a chance to argue otherwise. The man whose name was on those envelopes, I never spoke a word to him, never needed to. He was evidence. Evidence does not require a conversation. She built something for 19 months she thought was invisible. She stood before 63 people and renewed a promise she had already broken. And she looked me in the eye the entire time. And the post office undid all of it. One misdelivered envelope, a name that would not stay quiet in the back of a cop's head. A night she said she had to work late. That is how it ends sometimes. Not with something dramatic, not with a confrontation nobody walks away from clean, just a plain white envelope in the wrong mailbox, and a husband who spent 15 years learning exactly what to do when something does not add up. If something in your life is not adding up right now, pay attention to that. Do not explain it away. Follow it, because the truth has a way of finding you eventually. The only question is whether you find it first. My ex-wife tried to call me once while I was at work. I sent the call to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. I changed my number that night.